John, Anthony, picture Britain in the mid 1800s. Factories are roaring. We're in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. There's trains and steam engines spreading all over, and the world's changing. And at the bottom of that is really one thing. It's coal. Then engines get more efficient, okay? So you'd think Britain would use less coal as the steam engines and everything gets less efficient and uses less coal, better engines, less waste, lower consumption. But there was an economist, William Stanley Jevons. He noticed the opposite thing was happening. As coal became more efficient to use, it became more useful, and it started being used everywhere. Cheaper power meant more machines, more factories, more production, more trains. And so ultimately, there was more coal being used, not less. And this became known as Jevons Paradox. When something gets dramatically more efficient, we think we're going to use less of it, but we actually end up using more of it. And we're going to talk today about how this applies to AI. I think that's a lot of what's going on with AI, right? We all think, oh boy, it's supposed to give us all this free time and we'll be able to spend more time with our family and get more done and blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't really know anybody that's working less because of AI. Everybody I know, including me, is working more. So we're going to talk about that. Why is that, why is that happening? So John, you want to talk about some other examples from history here?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things are really interesting. Like back in the early 1800s, even going back to the 1600s, 80 to 90% of the US workforce, and some estimates put even north of 90% worked in agriculture. And there's a 35-year period in the 1800s where that agricultural workforce moved toward the Industrial Revolution and people were retooling their jobs. And so you think about all the things that are supposed to give us more time and sort of did. But I think about washing machines are a great example. We didn't used to have washing machines. There was a couple, 2.5 workers per kind of one type of household in the early 1900s. And things like the washing machine gave us less people to work in the household, but that doesn't mean we work less. I would say we're probably doing more laundry today. I don't have any science behind this. My guess is we do more laundry today than we did in the early 1900s. People used to have 2 or 3 sets of clothes. And I don't know about you guys, but I've got, full closet full of clothes now. And probably the same for you. So when we find technology advancing and more efficiencies get found, often that leads to more or better lifestyle. I would argue that most people today live better than almost all of the, kings and queens of history from indoor plumbing and, sanitation and medicine and, education. And so I think what we're looking at is that if you took all the gains in productivity and assumed we were never going to do more work, then a lot of our fears might be real. But that's never been the case in human history that I can find. We've always found new things to apply the work to.
During that time, standard of living has increased tremendously. Every time there was a breakthrough in technology, there's hundreds of examples. I was standing here thinking, in the last 25 years, a country that was 90% agrarian, because of the technologies of manufacturing, have moved almost 100% of that agrarian population to the factories, if you will, in the businesses, and moved off the farms into the city. And now I think it's 70% of China's population is considered middle class, where in 2002, when I was there, I think it was less than 20 of that population. So, I mean, to me, it suddenly strikes me as a shining example of the opportunity of what technology, and we don't think of manufacturing plants as technology, but I guarantee you Ford and GM think of the manufacturing plants in China as with huge advances in technology and robotics and so on and so forth. So yeah, I just think it's amazing to think about even our recent history, what's happened.
50 years ago, 1976, we were just seeing the start of the personal computer at the earliest stages of 1976. And then, 100 years ago in 1926, we couldn't even see what was going to happen today.
When computers came out, I mean, a lot of the name came from that was a job title, is that there were humans with a pencil and paper and maybe even pre-calculator. They would compute numbers. And that job is no longer with us, but those were smart people that could find other things. So let's go back to Jevons Paradox for a minute. Again, the concept, efficiency gain means lower cost per unit, but that means demand rises, right? And AI makes producing intelligence in a lot of ways cheaper. We produce more. And part of where this topic came from, I saw a tweet. I think Mark Andreessen retweeted. I would love to give credit to the original source, but it said, I don't know anybody working less because of AI. And that really hit me right between the eyes, because what it's allowed me to do is I am able to do things that I couldn't do 6 months, a year, a couple of years ago. And it just opens tons and tons of opportunity. And I'm working more and I'm thinking about, boy, I could do this business and this business, but I need somebody to execute it. Right. And because there's only 24 hours in a day, but my possibilities have opened up more than the efficiency. Right. And I think go ahead, John.
Super interested to see what happens in terms of like revenue per employee, which is, I don't think it's the best metric for a lot of reasons, but it's certainly interesting as we look at what people are generating in terms of productivity. I think, gross profit per employee is probably a better number, but not every company ubiquitously shows that number. So, but there's one company right now that I think has made national news that was, $400 million and 2 employees and a bunch of contractors, of course, but like, that's interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I even think back when I first got in the cabinet business, we used to deliver and we would tell people 6 to 8 weeks, and they were amazed because normal was 8 to 12 weeks back then. Well, now there's manufacturers that can deliver much faster, and it's just very quickly all of a sudden. It used to be if I had 6 to 8 weeks and there were back orders or something took 10 weeks, it was no big deal. People weren't in that much of a hurry. Now, customers would be like, even their expectations have changed in the market, right? Now, if it took you 10 weeks, they'd lose their minds.
Well, and
So,
strategy is about saying no to things, right? And so I think that saying no to the right things today maybe becomes even more important because it's so much easier to say yes. And right now, I think the cost of utilizing AI is going to continue to rise for all the reasons we've talked about in past episodes. Go check those out if you want to listen in on those conversations. But I think we're going to see that like really getting focused is going to be an important thing, and strategy will become a lot more day to day in terms of what we say yes and what we say no to.
yeah, I've been thinking about this in terms of some of the stuff I'm doing is taking me more time because I'm having to learn how to do it. I'm learning new skills and applying them and growing in that way. And so part of me says, well, once I get to this point, right, and my AI agents are doing all these things, I will have free time. But I don't know that that's going to happen because I said I just have an abundance of ideas and I can easily fill that time with the next best idea.
Let me
So
say this, and I'm not really throwing cold water on all this, but this is nothing new. Okay, AI is, the search and the mission of continuous improvement has been going on for since man began. So I'll take you back let's go back to the 90s when several companies embraced Six Sigma. And our youngsters out there probably don't know what that is, but it's a continuous improvement methodology where you try to get 6 zeros after the decimal point of quality. Think of an airplane. If I told you that 99% of the time an airplane will take off and land safely, you might not get on that plane. But if I told you 99.99999% of the time you are getting on that airplane. So I remember the pressure of having to go through continuous education, earn your black belt in Six Sigma methodology, then apply it to GE was famous for this. Apply it to your business. Everyone had a project, and you had to show how you were more productive now than you were yesterday using the Six Sigma tools. Then I left Sears and went to Toyota, where they have the most famous continuous improvement methodology, the Toyota production system. And I spent a year back and forth in Japan learning this thing with a group of men and women who are the smartest people I have ever been around with. And the unbelievable pressure to take those learnings back to Toyota and apply it directly to my business in a way that I could quantify. And so now here we are today, and John, I'm sure you got more examples of this, but today we've got this, machine, and a machine and keyboards and a microphone, really, because that's what most people are doing. And we're all under incredible pressure to improve. And, and God forbid, if you're working in a bigger company, you fall behind the knowledge curve, you're irrelevant. And that was the case with Six Sigma. That was the case with the Toyota production system. And now it's the case with AI. The pressure is incredible to, be up the knowledge curve and be able to use these tools in a way that you can prove your worth, literally. You have to prove your worth to get hired. You have to prove your worth to stay employed. Or if you want to start your own business, you have to prove your worth that you're going to deliver value to a consumer or a business to make enough money to stay in business. So it's just, it just dawns on me that this is nothing new and the pressure remains the same. So get used to it, because next year, next month, next decade, there'll just be a new reason to be under pressure.
Yeah, look at farming. Look at these fancy combines and tractors and how much work that can do compared to what it used to be with humans using horse or oxen or whatever else, right? It's freed those people up. AI does the same thing, right? And again, I've said this over and over. I believe in the Star Trek future where, we'll find new stuff. If you watch Star Trek, they have all new technologies and capabilities. And, next thing you do, you're mining other planets and, building Dyson swarms and, every other technology that we've talked about. So, but we talked, was it a couple weeks ago, we talked about how our 10-year goals a lot of times are not equivalent to our actions, right? And we talked about people wanted to spend more time with friends, fun, family. And I think that's what we're really talking about here, more than, is are people getting, I'm convinced that we're not going to have a job shortage, that it's going to create job abundance. There might be a little bit of messiness in the turnover, although I'm now convinced that's going to be less than ever, because all the things we've been talking about for the last few minutes, there's actually going to be more jobs, more opportunity, more abundance. But is it leading to more happiness, more fun, more friendship, more connection?
Well, and Randy, I would say this. There are people that are going to be less inclined to change. And so I think that messiness is real, but not for technology reasons, for human reasons. And so my encouragement is that, understand what you can and can't control. A really smart mentor of mine once told me there's only two things you can control: your thoughts and your actions. And so, the messiness is going to be more messy where people are unwilling to change, and less messy where people are willing to change. And then I think relationships are going to become more and more important. And, one of the cool things for me is, my mom passed away in 2017, but I can load up all of her emails into an AI agent and I can go have a conversation with her about what she would say about parenting with my children on the one hand. On the other hand, I want to make sure that doesn't stop the conversation I really am going to have with my wife about those things, so that I'm talking to an AI instead of I'm trying to balance those two things in my head, right? About it's cool that I want to go see what I think my mom might have said. That's interesting, but I don't want to shortchange the real relationship that's really important to me, right? And so I've just noticed that it'd be really easy to lean into the AI and not actually go have the conversation with my wife.
Well,
And she makes it
AI
easy to be
offers,
fair.
what for me, AI has offered infinite analysis. There's nothing you can't analyze. There's no data you can't scrutinize. And I think I'm finding myself going down wormholes. John and I have experience in call center management, big call centers. And back in the day, we used to run call center reports that had, I don't know, John, ours had 20 metrics across the top of the page, right? And, we measured everything, call time, abandon rates, by rep, by product, blah, 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 blah. And frankly, it was all a waste of time because there were two or three things that mattered, in a call center in terms of productivity and quality of the customer experience. I find myself back at that. doing the work that I'm doing now, consulting for some people, I'm ripping spreadsheets apart. I'm throwing them up into chat or Gemini or wherever I'm throwing them up and asking really detailed questions, getting answers that I cannot use, that don't really matter. I have gone full circle in my almost 45 years of business experience. So I'm going to take a step back from this and kind of, what's a good word, John? I guess filter or, carve off some of what I'm doing and try to get back to what do my customers really need? What's going to help them change their business for the good, and just kind of use AI to focus on, the few, not the many. See if that gets me somewhere. Because right now I've overdone it. I mean, the data
Yeah,
I've
you've
done.
heard my talk on numbers, Anthony. You guys get sick of me talking about numbers and the difference between a forward-looking, KPI versus a backward-looking objective. Both important, but man, it is easy to get buried in data if you don't only look at what's actionable and don't have agreement amongst the stakeholders about what a number means. The amount of just ridiculous and unnecessary debate you can get into is worthless, and it's why it's so important to have the conversation about what's an executive scorecard, what's a functional scorecard, what's a process scorecard, what's a project, and getting really clean language around that. That's one of the reasons I went to like 16 CEOs of companies and COOs late last year and said, let's find one common set of language we can use around what done means and around what important means. And so we got these really clean sets of language cross company. And then each company had to go in and do the same thing for their scorecard. But like, yeah, getting really clean definitions for communication, which is the opposite of what I hear from people when they say things like, well, to me, this means blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, that's, danger will, and relationships become super important in that, in that navigation.
Back to the knowledge gap. Yes, I've developed too much data, but in several cases, I have found some things, right? Some very important things. Now, you use the word stakeholders. If the stakeholder is behind the knowledge curve and doesn't really understand where you came from, you've got a real battle on your hands. And it hasn't been pleasant, because in some cases you're actually calling people out. And there's a nuance to that you have to apply, that you got to be careful, because when you're dealing with third parties who have a position, right? They're consulting, I'm consulting, then there's the stakeholder of the business. If we're not in alignment, or there's no understanding, it gets to be very, very difficult to execute. So you've done all this work, and you created the roadmap, and no one's going to do anything with it.
So, John, Anthony, you just got done talking about all the numbers, all of these metrics. What metrics should people be optimizing for? Like with AI, what is a win? What does that look like? Right? Because we talk about freedom and time. And so what numbers should we be talking about?
Are you talking inside a company, Randy? Or are you talking about like personally? Because those were two
I'm
separate
talking about,
questions.
I don't care if it's a 20-year-old college student or a 25-year-old getting in the workspace or somebody that's 80 years old and raising grandkids. Like, if they're using AI, what metrics, how should they be judging if they've gone too far, as Anthony said, or if it could make their life? What's the right metrics?
You'd be shocked to hear I have an opinion about this, Anthony.
Can't imagine.
For me, I think, Randy, it's like, where are you trying to get to professionally and personally, and measuring against that? And so personally, it's like, if you're trying to balance for a season, or if you're trying to learn for a season, I think setting milestones so that you can say, I'm getting where I want to go, wherever that is really important. And then I think inside the business, every business has revenue and fulfillment and people and AI operations and technology and, accounting and finance. And so getting super clear about what's important and why it's important, and making sure that you're not driving some. I'll give you a great example. I had somebody who worked in an accounting department once tell me how they wanted to set up all of our accounting and finance measurement. And when I asked them what they were optimizing toward, it was about filing taxes for that one day a year where you have to file your taxes, 4 days a year for companies. But I was like, hey, look, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to actually optimized for managing the business day to day. And then we'll make those adjustments for tax appropriately on the days where we have to do that. But the job of accounting and finance is to manage the business day to day, not to make the job easier on tax day. And that was just a big miss. And so I think having an executive team that really understands what the target is, and that becomes really important for what we measure, how much we measure, or how little we measure. And then I think on the personal note, it's making sure that, you're being as deliberate in your life about what things it is you want to get accomplished so that you're not inadvertently going off course.
Going off course is a big deal. There are stories now. Now, of course, the podcasts are all littered with stories of duplicative efforts by people in the same company doing the same thing. Same workflow improvements. One company spent $500 million with a B dollars on tokens, and they found out that they were basically there was nothing really that was gained for those tokens. And for those that don't know what a token is, that's your usage on a with one of the agentic
Did I hear that right? It was $500 million or a half billion tokens?
$500 million.
Oof.
Yeah. It was some ridiculous thing. And then there's story after story of 5 different people solving the same problem. And so you've basically given, Ferrari to a 16-year-old, a group of 16-year-olds and saying, hey, take off, go out. And they're smashing into every tree and, rolling them over, and they're just making a mess of things. And it's you know, so you ask what the key metric is, Randy. The key metric is, as John said, where do you want to be? Like, what's the most important thing in your business? Do you want to drive revenue? Do you want to reduce headcount? Do you want to increase gross profit? And then, having a strategy around all those things. If you're a small business, an entrepreneur, you want to, streamline where you can streamline so that you can engage more customers and get more throughput from customers into your business. So if you're in the home improvement business, you want to be able to sell more of whatever it is and get it installed or get it delivered faster and faster so that you can have more throughput. So how is AI going to be used? Can AI be used to help you with that? So having a goal
I would
is
push.
critical,
You talk about the 5 whys. You might even be the person that taught me the 5 whys, as you or John, one of you. But why do people want to be more productive? Why do they want to be more profitable? Why do they want more headcount, right? So for me, a lot of that comes down to sovereignty, or to simplify it a little bit, let's just say freedom, right? And I want those things so I can do that, right? But I'm thinking, if I'm up till 2 a.m. working on this, because it will create that sovereignty and that freedom in my life, right? What do I want the freedom and the sovereignty to do? This is kind of our topic from a couple of weeks ago, right? It's to be able to enjoy myself, travel more, spend time with family, et cetera, all, like enjoy life. But now
Yeah,
all
I
of
mean,
a
it's the
sudden I'm
single
working
biggest
more than I'm
management
working
mistake
here.
is not asking the 5 whys. It's the single biggest mistake. And we all fall into it in our personal lives, in our professional lives. It's all the same. You got to have leadership. You got personal leadership. You have to have business leadership to not, because that's what's creating the work. Everyone's working harder because there isn't great leadership around this. So if you're working for a company like Meta or one of these, a manufacturing firm that's got tens of thousands of people, and you're looking around and you're seeing people hustling, staying later, working 8 to 8 because they got 12 agents working on a project, and one agent finishes and you can jump to the next one, and so on and so forth. And that gets back to the points of pressure I talked about. You're gonna be left behind. There's just no two ways about it in that particular world. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say about it, but it's feeding on it's kind of like eating your young. It's feeding on itself.
Another way to look at this, you guys know, a lot of stuff comes back to money and what's the core problem, right? And you were talking about how life is easier, Anthony, and you're right. We live better than kings and queens. People live better than Rockefeller lived now, with air conditioning and indoor plumbing and all the different stuff. But if we wouldn't have to go back that far to where one person could take care of a family with multiple kids, right? And they could take vacations, they could pay their mortgage, and life was easier. And now with broken money and people's savings, it's hard for a lot of people right now. They're both working, and the hope is that AI makes them more productive, so they can't do that. But I would also say we have to fix the money at some point, because otherwise it's just going to keep they're going to keep printing more money, going more in debt, and we have to be more efficient, I would argue, just to survive in today's world than we did 50 or 70 years ago.
I don't dispute the broken money, and I don't dispute that the possibilities of creating, more abundance for people isn't a distinct possibility. What I disagree with is there's a lot of choice people are making that are making things difficult for themselves. Take you back to post-World War II. A home builder in Jonestown, New York, built, I don't know, several thousand, 1,400 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes. And that was considered fantastic living. People, veterans came back from the war. They had a community, and it was fine. Today, you tell a kid, here's a 1,400 square foot home in Kansas, Missouri, with 3 baths and 2 bedrooms on, a 10,000 square foot lot, and they're going to tell you to get lost. That's not what TikTok wants them to do, or Facebook or Instagram. They want the 2-story acre lot, 5 bedrooms, all that. So people have changed, in my opinion, and I'm guilty of it.
Well, Anthony, and take us back to, you've been to Europe a couple times recently. Take us back to like the same affluent upper middle class European, landowner or whatever also wants the 10,000 square foot, 5,000 to 6,000 square foot place. Right.
No. The social influences of the keeping up with the Joneses, it's a well-known term, right? Keep up with the Joneses. It's actually a disease, in my opinion. It's actually a disease. We were out on the West Coast last week. And John, you're exactly right. Out in wine country in the Sonoma Valley and heading towards the Pacific coast, it was extraordinarily modest. There were, yes, high on the hills, there were some amazing homes and so forth. By and large, it was an agrarian economy. It was a lot of, what I would call ramshackle homes with, campers in the driveway. And I'll guarantee you those people are just as happy, probably happier than some hustler, here in Austin trying to get the 4,000 square foot house in Westlake, So, yeah, I think this is something that we've got to step back and consider. I don't see how it's going to change with the influences. Maybe we'll flip the switch on this thing, and as socialism takes over our country and the pie gets divided equally, and you only get a 1,400 square foot house instead of a 4,400 square foot. I don't know, but I think that's part of the problem, along with inflation. Along with a lot of other things that we're dealing with. But
I think as we deal with abundance, I would say, it's important to understand how to filter the messages coming in and why the message is coming in. Like I'm very sensitive to like why marketers tell us what they tell us and why people, and so that way at least it goes through a filter so that I can be more informed about what decisions I want to make. So.
Well, let's talk about the 5 F's, right? John, you have this framework of the 5 F's, family, fun, friends, fitness, finance. So let's talk about, I think we've talked about the financial, the professional one a fair amount, right? Being more efficient, working harder. And, I do think maybe the financial finish line, this is a good place to remind people of that. Like, that's kind of where do you get off that hamster wheel? And you don't have to work like that and constantly be chasing it. But let's go with family. What is the right way for people to think about this in the lens of maximizing their family and having abundance in that area?
I mean, for me, I think there's things that I want to be able to do for my family that sometimes would have taken more work that I can take less work so I can spend more time with them. And so I'll give you a couple ones that are really just helpful for us. There's many couples that I've talked to, and I would put my marriage in this same bucket, where the conversation of like, where do you want to go to dinner tonight? And it becomes a thing back and forth, and it becomes more stressful than people think it should be. And so my wife and I just took a list of all the things we enjoy doing together and all the restaurants we've enjoyed being at. And we dropped it into a little thread. And so now every other week, I drop in and say, hey, I want to plan date night for my wife. And she loves that. And every other week, she grabs one and says, I'm going to plan date night. And it makes it really easy for us to try the things that are important to us. Right. And so that's one example of how it just has reduced stress and time for us. That's been fun and easy and light. And so, and then I think the other thing it's done is it just, there's more for us to talk about because we're both learning AI right now. There's a topic we have when we want to connect about what she's learned for the day, what I've learned for the day, how we're utilizing it in different parts of our life. And so using it as a point of connection has been good for us. And so now that being said, AI doesn't choose where our date night goes. It just makes the process easier.
Being in the last stage of the last season of my life, the amount of information that's available relative to health and fitness is just, well, it's actually overwhelming, and it's contradictory. So I spend a lot of time sifting through, what is going to work for me in the current state of health that I'm in, and trying to figure out what's not real. And so you have to, in order to do that, you've got to really, go to multiple sources and get confirmation on things. There's a new supplement that is all the rage for longevity called NAD3. Zero, 100% zero longitudinal studies about its effectiveness. Yet you can't get it, and if you get it, it's expensive. And I've got 3 bottles of it in there because my wife keeps buying a different version of it every 20 minutes. But it's an example of the good of that is you have a quick reference. Before, I'd have to ask you, what are you doing at the gym and so on and so forth. Now you can, put a plan together. You can upload your medical charts. You can upload your blood tests, and, at least become conversant of what you ought to be doing or what you ought to be changing. And then you seek, obviously, if you're talking about supplements and other such things, you seek a doctor's advice at the end of all that. So that's what I'm
And
doing.
then Brandy, here's a great example of like where the filters matter, right? Because a lot of the LLMs are built on Reddit and things that are not scientifically kind of accurate. And so having what Anthony said about talk to your doctor at the end, or or build your AIs to be more factual. I just think, Anthony does this naturally, where he's naturally skeptical of the information and will keep digging. I think it's way too easy today to kind of just take the first answer and go with it. And that's where, we had problems with LLMs, and probably still do, about LLMs making LLMs dumber over time, where they just kind of, because they're, so I think there's a caution there about how much content can be created. And I think models are getting better at that, but that's just a word of caution for the listener.
Yeah,
Yeah, even travel. I'll give you an example. I used the LLMs to help me select hotels and places to stay and things to do. And one of the hotels that kept coming up as it's a great place. I won't use it. I won't tell you where it was. It was expensive. It was in the heart of things. Everything about it was supposed to be great. The reviews online were great and all that. We get there, and it was a dorm room for all intents and purposes. There was basically a Grateful Dead curtain between the bedroom and the sitting area, and the sitting area had a sofa recliner type thing that one end was higher than the other end. And then when we told the manager about it, they sent a housekeeping crew came up. They didn't speak English, and they made a bed. They put sheets on it. And they turned it into a bed. It was just the worst freaking experience you could possibly imagine. So to your point, John, don't take everything at face value. And I think that's a real danger because, people can get an answer quickly, and there's nothing like a quick answer, right? Get a quick answer, take action. No, definitely not.
I think the
Definitely.
underlying thing that we haven't necessarily hit on is time, right? And we talk about using AI or whatever it is, modern technology, we make our business more efficient, more effective. We buy more time, but it's more time to do what, right? If we just planned it back into doing work and we do more and more work, that means we're not making time for family, for friends, for fun, for fitness. And I'm thinking about even the prompts I use in AI. Like I'm working on business related stuff mostly. It never even occurs to me to factor in family, friends, fun, fitness into it. And if I stay up till 2 in the morning coding on something because I'm excited and I'm trying to create all this efficiency over there, and now it impacts my sleep, and maybe now I don't get up as early, so I don't go to the gym the next day, and I'm tired the next day, right? I'm stealing time from one area to take to another. And I think really maybe that's the thing we have to be protective of is how are we splitting up our time? It's the same battle in a new package.
Yeah, balance, right? We've talked about this a lot. Being conscious of the balance between the five F's and being aware of when you're not devoting enough time to something or even giving it any effort because you're focused on one or the something else, and it's usually finance that drags us away from the other four F's. So yeah, I make it sound so easy. Just keep it in balance. Whatever. But it's an effort even for me. And I'm a part-time worker right now, but my days are still filled, and I can't say that I'm balancing very, very well all the time. So.
All right, let's put a bow on this thing, gentlemen. Last thoughts here.
Well, there is some good, right? I mean, let's lift the spirits, right? John mentioned the two-man company that's churning out 400 million in revenue. So it's an example where AI can, a small team can compete with a big team. It does do a lot of mundane tasks, meeting notes, job descriptions, transcripts. It can develop formats for you and plan for you, do brainstorming, shorten learning curves, right? And again, I don't have to call Dr. John to ask him about a particular medicine or a treatment from his medical practice. I can get a start by getting the information. So there's a lot of positive stuff. The ability to plan travel very easily, schedule things. So there's a lot of good here. But like anything else, it's like a skill saw. You got to be careful, because you can lop off a finger just as easily as you can cut a 2x4. So that would be my take on all this.
I think that's perfectly said. I think I'll leave it exactly at that and look forward to the break.
I just think my big takeaway is that, yes, there's all kinds of advantages. I agree with all that. And I've got it doing all kinds of cool things. But for me, I need to be more intentional with my time and where I focus it and splitting it into some of the other five F's. So, listeners, we will be right back after the break with the abundance briefing.
Here at Tales of Abundance, we know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key five F's for lots of us. Taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Listeners, welcome back. John, I'm going to turn over to you for the abundance briefing and talking about relationships in this Harvard study. Tell us about this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a study at Harvard that's been going on for 9 decades now that looks at happiness, and there's a lot of critiques of the study about, who's being studied. But at the end of the day, 9 decades of research, and it can't causally definitely say that relationships cause happiness, but the correlations are pretty high. And at the end of the day, people who have great, strong relationships tend to report being happier, and people who are more lonely tend to be less happy. And so I think it's a really interesting data set. And I think, anybody who wants to find a reason to poo-poo through, part of the bias of the study and the scientific rigor and the randomized control, lack of randomized control, maybe. I think you can do that, but I think the interesting part is this. People who are lonely tend to be less happy. People who are in strong, great relationships, marriage and otherwise, tend to be happier. Like there's something to it, and it appears that there's been something to it for at least the last 88 years.
Well, we all know people that are in both, bifurcated, the hardworking loner who's, all he does or she does is work, 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 and kind of doesn't really devote any time for themselves personally or with family and friends. And they're kind of lumbering around, they're not in great moods. I certainly golf with a few of those guys on weekends. It's on the other hand, had a great weekend with a couple of guys that were, leading abundant lives with, babies and grandkids and great spouses, talking about trips and weddings in Greece and so on and so forth. And it was a very, very pleasant day on Saturday for sure with those guys. So it was a very different mood, if you will, when someone appears to be in a good social mindset and open for friendships. And I didn't even know these guys, by the way. It was the first time I ever met them. And we were able to, break through and have great conversation, a lot of fun, walking through the woods looking for golf balls. I mean, it was great. It was had a great day.
The Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, who was twice the Surgeon General, I think once equated, if memory serves, loneliness as the great epidemic of our society. And I think it was something like 15 cigarettes a day of smoking was the same as being lonely. And I don't remember the numbers exactly, but directionally, that's right. And so, I mean, think about that. Like smoking 3/4 of a pack of cigarettes a day being similar to loneliness in terms of the epidemic. Like that's a strong statement from the Surgeon General.
Yeah.
Well,
So the upbeat message here is, be conscious of your surroundings. Don't be alone. Get out. It doesn't matter where you go, be pleasant. That's what I find is when people are pleasant, and when they're self-effacing, they're much easier to approach and get along with and have a conversation with, as opposed to, the stodgy old man, which I'm trying not to be.
Well, the four skills I talk about all the time with a relationship are being accepting of somebody else's position, being trustworthy so that you keep people's secrets where it's appropriate, being appropriately vulnerable and sharing about yourself, and then choosing to see people in their best light, when that's appropriate. Like those four skills are really important for connection.
well, seeing people in their best light leads us to forgiveness and staying at Harvard. John, you want to talk about this study? That also this is from the Harvard Gazette, but the longevity study and using forgiveness as a longevity study. You want to take us through that?
This one was interesting to me and it was new for me, but I think what I generally talk about with forgiveness, and this is not mine, this is something I've read somewhere else, is that, if I don't forgive someone, that's a weight that I carry myself. And the other person probably doesn't even know or care that I have or haven't forgiven them. And so I think, I've read several books on forgiveness over the years and lots of papers on this. And I think, this is not kind of my area of specific expertise, but on a personal note, I will say that I work really hard to forgive myself about things. I work really hard to clean up my side of the street when I make a mess, regardless of who it is or where it is, if for my benefit, if not for theirs. And I try not to let ego get involved. And you heard me say try lots of times there because I'm certainly not perfect at it. But man, I think forgiveness is as much about the person doing the forgiving or more than the person being forgiven. It takes practice.
Anthony, let's
Yeah.
say you.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because my mental model growing up and through my, corporate business career taught me to forgive no one, to trust no one, to, be prepared to fight, to, shoot, ready, fire, aim. It took me a long, long time to even get marginally better at this because it's so ingrained in us. And when I say us, I mean people fighting for the things we talked about earlier in the episode about fighting for finance and promotions and things like that. That, when someone in a big corporation, a peer, does something that it just doesn't help you or even hurts your career, it is really hard to forgive that person. Now, in personal life, for me, it depends on what the transgression was. If someone violated a trust, that's a tougher thing to do. Smaller transgressions, not a big deal, easier to do, but none of it's simple. None of this is simple. So I have
Sometimes, Anthony, it's like it's not even known, right? Like we've talked about this on our show before, but you and I got sideways a few years ago, and it was years and years into our relationship. And I mean, I think it's fair to say you were fairly pissed at me, and I didn't even know it. Do we want to tell that story again?
Well, the quick story is I was doing something and I had expected John to do the same thing and he didn't, but I never asked him to do that same thing and he didn't know I was doing the thing. So I got wrapped around an axle all by myself until one day John said, what the fuck is wrong with you? And I said, God damn it, you aren't. And I filled in the blank. He goes, well, I didn't know. So I was holding a grudge that I created all by myself, all by myself. Not proud of that, but a learning experience for sure.
I think that
but we had to resolve it though.
Yeah, we had to resolve it.
That happens all the time. You watch people and one person makes one assumption and the other person makes another assumption, or maybe the other person isn't, like in this case, wasn't even involved. They hadn't even thought about it, right? And
hold on, in Anthony's defense, there was something going on that I could have been more sensitive to as well, right? Like I could have watched more closely, asked questions earlier. So he made it seem like it was all one-sided there, but there was definitely a part of it where I could have been a little more just thoughtful and maybe asked a couple questions earlier. But boy, as soon as it came out, it was like, well, I'll do that. Like it wasn't a big ask, but I didn't know. And then once it was like, well, we're going to fix it, then we had to do the repair work, right? And it wasn't like I was like, you son of a bitch, it's all yours to repair. Like I had to own my piece of it too, which was I could have been a little more sensitive. I could have asked to help you in that way. I could have but now and lucky for us, we had years of trust built up behind that, because if it had been a lot earlier in the relationship, that could have gone a lot differently.
perfect. So it's your fault, not Anthony's, and I can't believe he forgave you. That's my takeaway. All right. So I'm trying to take us back. I'm trying to take us back to the thing, right? Like we're talking about holding a grudge, but that's not the point of the article and the study. The point of the study is to forgive, and you will live longer. Like we're wallowing in this pain. That's the opposite of what this study says, right? And I get it. Sometimes talking it out and discussing it can help. But Anthony, one of the things that jumped out to me is you're like, it's hard to forgive. And it is for most, but not everybody, right?
No.
Some people are really
and not in every situation. Back to the longevity, I don't know this to be a fact, but I would imagine by being an unforgiving person and retaining all that stress raises your cortisol levels. And, that's a biomarker for not longevity, right? The whole discussion of lowering your cortisol levels or using your cortisol levels at the best time of day and lowering it as the day goes on and so on and so forth. And if you're holding on to this, it's a biological hazard that's actually eating away at your lifestyle and your health.
And Anthony, that's where I wish the study would have gone, was actually doing some of that blood work, because they did some interesting social science. They could have done some very interesting biological science that would have been even more powerful. I think, not to say that what they did wasn't powerful, but I think that we could go one layer deeper there. It's really tough to measure brain chemistry. It's not really tough to measure cortisol in the blood. So anyway,
well, it goes back to asking the 5 whys. Why does forgiveness increase longevity? It's why, and they may or may not have done that. I don't know, but you live longer because you're healthier. You live longer because you have brain health, you have body health, your cells are protecting you against, disease and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
So the takeaway for me is that you have to work on the skill of forgiving people, letting go of grudges, moving on, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Like these are all strategies to live longer, right? And why? I mean, if we know it works, I'm a little more like, okay, if I know it works, I don't care. Here's what do I need to execute, right? And I just think we need to work on that skill set. And it's hard in today's world because there is so much conflict, whether it's, it just doesn't matter these days. Everything is politicized and conflict, and social media builds it. So maybe it's stop watching the news, get off social media. That might be, get out in nature. That might be as much of this as anything. But anyway, forgive your neighbor. That is the big takeaway here. So
Yeah, I like to go get out in nature. That's a non-trivial thing. Being in bright sunlight, you know, reflecting on what's important, how, what am I hanging on to for no good reason? You can expand your thoughts and, come to grips with something by not being behind a keyboard.
I I did this the other night. I was really upset about something and I was just stewing, right? And I thought, okay, I got to get some exercise. And just get out. And literally, I went, I grabbed the dog. We went for a walk. I'm lucky I live down there's a river where these big, beautiful trees and bushes. And, I just took a 90-minute walk. So it's a combination of getting out in nature. I think being by the water relaxes me, walking the dog. And I came back and I was 90% better. Right. So, yeah.
Hey, Randy, about that situation, did you go out pretty hot, like in the middle of an argument or in the middle of like feeling pretty emotional about something?
Yeah, I was pissed, right? It was kind of some of it was I just needed to eject from a situation, but it also I was actively like, okay, how do I just and
I think that's super
exercising,
important. Like
getting exercise. Yeah.
yeah, when you get super emotionally charged up, there's some chemicals that drop into your bloodstream that can take up to 45 minutes to get worked out. And so sometimes just taking the space and the time and not trying to solve it while those chemicals are in your bloodstream, super important. Not the topic of today, but I think that's a great example of where you got to let the chemistry work itself out before you go fix a problem. And time can be really helpful from a biochemistry perspective. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but great example.
All right, let's move to the battle for AI safety. And this is a big one. It's interesting. Here, I live in Bastrop, and there's data centers going up all around here, both Elon Musk with Tesla and SpaceX, but outside. And there's another one that's supposed to be going in, and there's a meeting tonight. And we were having dinner with some friends, and one of the ladies like, yeah, they're going to take all of our water. Right. And I was like, not really, not modern data centers. I know some of the old ones do, and I was just, like talking to them, and they all had all of these preconceived notions that are just not true in 2026. Right. And so it's, let's talk about Anthony. This is a topic I know you really wanted to talk about, but, I have some thoughts on what's going on and why it's happening. I mean, what's your take on
Well,
this?
nothing in life is simple, but let's try to reduce it down to its core. Fear sells, right? Sex sells and fear sells. And so who's creating fear? Politicians. Why are they doing that? Well, because they want to be on the side of the little guy, the family value, the middle America. Why? Why? Again, keep going through the whys. They want to get reelected. Why do they want to get reelected? They want to get rich. It's purely self-interest. It's so selfish. It's infuriating, and I'm going to have a hard time forgiving them, to be perfectly honest with you. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
tales of abundance. Here we go.
right. So you get the abundance part of it for them. They're going to get the votes, and they're going to get the cash from the companies that are going to want to sway their opinion when it comes to casting a vote for or against it. So they're going to get it both ways, and that's what's a little bit infuriating about it. The
Hey,
motivation
Randy,
is just wrong.
I talk to my family, mostly my kids and occasionally myself. Like I encourage them to fact before they feel. And it's really hard to do that, right? Like if you have a feeling, sometimes you can't control those feelings, but you can control how you react to it. And taking that 45 minutes to let the feelings subside and pass, and then check the facts, and then decide how you want to respond can be really helpful. And so I think that fact before you feel. The truth is you can't control your feelings, right? You're reacting to something, but you can choose how you act based on that feeling, right? And so I think that's the intermediate step that I encourage for my kids and for myself to, like, how, check it out before you
Yeah. Well, and
start
it's
acting.
hard, right? You hear something like this, I get it. You're a resident here. Everybody talks about water problems, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh God, these data centers are going to take all of our water. It's already an issue, right? Because there's a whole thing where Austin's trying to buy a whole bunch of our water, and people are up in arms about that
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And and so how can you keep track of all the things going on in the world? But back to Anthony's, what are their motivations and where does it come from? you know, Anthropic, I am suspicious of Anthropic. You know me, I'm kind of anybody that seems too holier than now. I'm a little suspicious. And this guy is a little holier than now. In fact, he's got the Pope on his side. The Pope decided, I don't know if you saw,
Well, that's not exactly. Speaking of fact, before you
Right.
feel, that's not exactly how that story goes.
but
But
the
we can
Pope,
keep going.
well, but the Pope is writing a 240-page document saying we need to regulate and stop AI. And he
Yeah,
talks
that's not
about
what he said. But
he's well, okay. So we'll get off that. We'll agree to disagree there
yeah, yeah.
probably. But
Okay.
you know, but there's also so Anthropic, if they don't have the power, and I've been noticing that models have been throttling me down more than ever lately and more quickly, and specifically Claude has been throttling me down really, really fast lately, which tells me they don't have enough power to run all the inquiries, which is why I think, like when they said they weren't opening up Mythos, I am now more convinced than ever that that was a marketing ploy. Right. And they're trying to come across. But the other thing, they are spending ungodly amounts of money now. They're becoming one of the biggest lobbyists in the country and spending money trying to get inside that regulatory moat. So what are their incentives, right? If they can get in, and right now it's hard to compete with those big four. But if you look where the technology goes in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, it'll probably become a lot easier unless they can build that regulatory moat and make laws that make it impossible for the little guy to compete, which is what government does
Yeah.
a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
try starting a bank in 2026. It's almost impossible. Or a meat packer is one I'm very, it's almost impossible to process meat in 2026.
So what's the abundance message about that?
Well, it's the abundance is we need these data centers, is what I think. Okay. By the way, there's also I was pulling up articles and I got article upon article upon article. The one here I'll share right now from the New York Post is this is just one of many that claim that a lot of these groups that are fighting this and a lot of this data is coming from the CCP, from China. Well, if we're in a race here, and this is an arms race similar to the Cold War in a lot of ways, I think, right? Well, China has way more energy and they could run many more data centers than we can run. If they can slow us down, that's a competitive advantage for China, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so whether it's Anthropic trying to maximize their shareholder value and their riches, or it's China trying to stay ahead of us, I think the message is we need these data centers if this is the race, right? And we need to put more money and
Yeah,
more effort into them.
we need the data centers. We're going to need them for a lot of reasons, not just AI. But this is a self-inflicted wound by these hyperscalers. All these guys have done is hype the valuation of their company. They raised 50 billion at a $900 billion valuation. They're so much so that, the the government's going to want to come in and take pieces of those companies, and they're coming into little towns in Bastrop and they're asking for tax breaks, and they have increased electrical cost in some communities where they could have taken those profits and guaranteed the electric bills would not go up, that the water usage would be with certain constraints, or bring their own power, which they've been authorized to do. So they've shot themselves in the foot a lot here. And again, fear sells. So you're never going to change people's mind about the water. I don't care how many times you tell them it recycles and comes back through the system, and they use 5,000 gallons once, and they need another 500 a month to replenish. That's it. That's all. That's less than flushing your toilet during the year, during the month. You're not going to change that. That's an instilled fear, and that's going to be there forever. So
Well,
the only way out is to buy your way out. And that's what these folks are going to have to do. They're going to have to buy their way out. Either have to buy their way to space, or they're going to have to buy their way to a nuclear reactor in their backyard, or they're going to have to guarantee that the people in the community are going to get free electricity, or it's going to be lower, not more. They're going to have to buy their way out. And if they don't do that, more, I mean, what is it, 50% of the projects are now on hold or have been canceled? Some number like that. I don't even know if anyone has an accurate read on that.
back to John's abundance framing, right? I mean, we need this if we're going to stay ahead. And it's not just that, it's robots and everything else, and efficiency comes. But this is going to, like we've talked about before, if you want to see a country's wealth in general, it is almost exactly tied to their energy output throughout all time. Places that don't create energy never have great economic output. And there is a model. We just talked about this, I think, last week, right? Bitcoin mines are going in all over Africa, bringing electricity to millions of people that never had them. And they're getting the communities behind it because they're giving them energy for really low prices, lower than almost anywhere in the world, and giving them access when they never had it. And then using all of the excess energy from the waterfall or whatever to mine Bitcoin. That model is here also. They could supply energy at a reasonable rate for a community and get people on board, so they're going to vote for that, and then use all the excess for the data center.
Yeah,
in a competitive world, better to have the resources and choose how to monitor, regulate, whatever, than to choose not to develop the resources when your competitor is going to be. Like, I think that's just the thing that we have to get our arms around, is that, you've got people that are going to do it no matter what. And then, having choices is better than not having choices. And so that to me is like, create more abundance, create more choices, and then you can choose later, and those are complex questions. I get that.
But this is no different than, by the way, what's been happening for centuries, right? Like a technology comes out, big corporations or other countries, whatever. I mean, recently, there was the whole, they shut down all the nuclear plants in Germany. And it turns out it was Russia that was financing all of the opposition to that, or I don't know about all of it, but the vast majority of it was being financed by Russia. Why? Because Russia was selling their oil and natural gas to Germany, and they didn't want to have to compete with nuclear. And I think this happens a lot more than we're aware of even. And, the news reports on it, and we go blissfully throughout our lives, not even aware how much is happening. So, all right, gentlemen, let's wrap this up. Listeners, if you're still here, you love us, download, subscribe, tell your friends, all that good stuff. We're growing. Help us keep growing faster. Anthony, John, I've enjoyed it. And until next time, everybody go spread a little abundance.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Anthony.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.